very much for joining us. I just want to start by asking you, do you think a town hall like this is necessary, something that Google has to do in the face of all of these revelations that they've come out?
I think that they have to have a public statement. They can't stay quiet, so this is their official way of addressing the situation. I'd be more interested to see if what they say is more than just reading out of their HR manual. So is it necessary? I think I'd hold my judgment until after I hear what they have to say.
Matthew, how did you feel, or were you surprised to see the contents of this memo, given the research you've done into diversity in the tech sector?
Right. Well, I mean, if you look at sort of a lot of the reporting that's been done on sort of companies like Google and others sort of in the tech industry, I mean, the thing that kind of comes up again and again is this idea of the sort of dominant demographic within a lot of these companies being sort of like the white male engineers. And so as a result, I mean, I think when this kind of came out, a lot of people looked at this and went, well, this is just endemic of sort of this culture that these companies have built up, right? It's just, it's not surprising within that context.
As someone who's worked so hard to promote women in technology, how did you feel when you read the details of that memo, Sadia?
I felt a few things, one of which is that I am somewhat bored of people who are shocked by this, because this has been going on for a while, and if you're surprised hearing about this, which a lot of people apparently are, you've not been paying attention to what people on the margins have been saying for a long time. The other thing that is interesting is this biological essentialist garbage arguments have been used against people from, for hundreds of years. When coding started, it was an unglamorous job, and the same arguments were used to actually say this kind of work actually belongs to women. So in like 1967, Cosmo literally had something that says, coding is just like planning dinner. That's why it belongs to women. And here we are, only a few decades later, where it's prestigious and lucrative, and suddenly there is revisionist history that it's always been a male-dominated field, and it's just not.
Is it important to have these discussions, though, in any company? I think some people have supported the person who wrote the memo and said, you have to have free speech. You have to be able to have these kinds of discussions without the fear of being fired. Is that fair?
Well, I think in this particular scenario, right, I think the way it's been sort of painted is a pretty clear sort of HR issue, right? This is someone who came out with a letter, essentially denigrating, a large population that he worked with, right? Sort of saying that, hey, you're all my colleagues, but, you're not as good as sort of your other colleagues for some of the reasons that he outlined in the memo. And so I think as a result, the reason that we're having sort of this town hall is because you have sort of company leadership coming out and sort of saying, like, this isn't okay, right? This isn't okay within a company to be saying this about, the people that you work with.
Is there a freedom of speech argument here to be made?
I don't think so, and only because we can't forget that while you have individual rights, you're also someone's coworker. You're a person who also lives, outside of the work that you do at Google. So when we say something like free speech and we say it without qualification, what we're saying is every argument for or against is equal merit, and it's not. Because when you're saying something like, you're a manager and you have women working on your team, and you're saying, actually, I don't think that you can be good at this because you're neurotic. I don't think that's cool. I don't think you can throw free speech at it and say, well, I'm entitled to my opinion. Sure, but you also have a job to do.
You mentioned that this wasn't surprising. Can you just tell us about your own experiences with this kind of stereotype and negative sense of women in technology? Have you run into it yourself?
I have, and I know a lot of people who have also run into this. I'm also frustrated with a lot of focus on personal stories, when the narratives that we have around this that support that tech could be hostile to almost anybody but straight white men, we're drowning in this data. So I'd like to ask a different question at this point, because I've been at this almost 10 years.
Yes.
So you can imagine how I want to move forward, and I want to talk about how to make it better, right? And I think the discussion now, and hopefully Google's town hall addresses some of this, is why is there an incentive to hire and behave this way, because a behavior cannot perpetuate without an incentive. So clearly there's something in our system that's not only allowing it to go forward, but encouraging it. And who are the people who can help reel it in, which includes people outside of companies. Media has a big role to play in not asking very basic questions, but moving forward and saying, how do we make this better, rather than saying, is this a real problem?
How do Canadian firms in your reporting, Matthew, stack up to the U.S. situation? You know, it'd be easy to say, oh, it's Silicon Valley problem. We're in a different country. Canada respects diversity. Is that fair?
So in Canada, I think we're a little bit sort of further behind in having a lot of these discussions, at least publicly, compared to some of the U.S. companies. And there's a couple of reasons for that. I mean, in the U.S., there's a federal requirement that a lot of this data already, be gathered in the first place. There's been a few years now where companies have sort of faced pressure and backlash to actually release reports and talk about their strategies in a way that I think we're moving towards here. But there's still sort of a lot of work to be done in sort of getting people to talk about this. But it's starting to happen. I think, if there's one thing that I've sort of found, and at least, starting to do a bit of this, ask some of these questions, it's that people are, I think, increasingly open to talking about it, but there's still a ways to go in terms of actually getting people to talk a little bit more about sort of strategies and how they're doing it.
So you mentioned talking about it as one of the ways that you can, solve the problem of diversity in technology. But beyond that, what other things can firms do? What are tangible steps they can do to make sure that memos like this aren't written, it's not acceptable, and people can be more equal in the workplace?
I think it's important to keep our focus on what the root cause of problems is. So the memo, as terrible as it was, is just a symptom of the kinds of people and what their thinking is, right? This person who wrote this memo is certainly not an exception. And most of the rhetoric around discussing this has been, wow, why would you write this down and circulate it? Not, why would you be a person who thinks this? And this person had a long history of having this kind of mindset. So this wasn't a new thing to come out of this person's behavior. And also, I've heard that he's been offered a job at WikiLeaks. So when I talk about incentives, this is what I mean. What I mean is, how do we create conditions where there is a tangible penalty to behave like this? So your question was, what can companies do? They can look at how they are incentivizing homogeneity in their workforce. Who are they hiring? Who is being promoted? And who is being left out of discussions, and who's not at their boardroom table?
Thank you both for this discussion. It's fascinating, and I'm sure we'll continue. Thanks
Thank
very
you
much.
for having us.
That was senior technology reporter Matthew Braga and Sadia Muzaffar, the founder of Tech Girls Canada.